The following morning brought a quiet too still to be comforting. The sky over Elias's property was heavy with clouds, as if even the weather sensed what was coming. Maribel sat at the kitchen table, the manila folder still in front of her. She hadn't slept. She had spent the night combing through every document, every blurry photo, every classified printout. Names, dates, maps, all tied to a covert operation her mother had uncovered before vanishing. Rosalind hadn't just been in danger. She had been silenced. And now, with these files in her hands, Maribel understood exactly why Elias had spent the last decade off the grid. This wasn't something you walked away from. Elias entered the room holding 2 cups of black coffee, setting one in front of her without saying a word. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes revealed the storm brewing beneath. "I know a journalist," he finally said. "Old Navy contact. Trustworthy. She works for an outlet that still cares about the truth." Maribel nodded. "We tell her everything. All of it." Elias hesitated. "That'll put a target on your back." Maribel met his eyes, steady and unafraid. "I've already been targeted. The only difference now is I get to fight back." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then he smiled, just barely. "You sound like her." Back in town, Silas had been pacing the length of their small living room since dawn. Maribel hadn't returned home, and her phone was going straight to voicemail. The silence gnawed at him. Eventually, he made a decision. He pulled the letter from Rosalind back out of his drawer and began cross-referencing dates and details. Something about the timeline still bothered him. Why had their parents never said a word about Rosalind? Why had she disappeared from their family's history so completely? And why now, after all these years, was everything unraveling like it had just been waiting to explode? There was more to this. He could feel it. Meanwhile, at a coffee shop in downtown D.C., Tamsin Wilderose sat at the far end of the patio, her sunglasses on, a laptop open in front of her. She'd been watching Elias's cabin for weeks. Ever since she saw Maribel approach him, she knew something was shifting. Tamsin wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. She had once served beside Rosalind in the same intelligence circle. But what she knew was dangerous. And though she didn't trust Elias, she also knew he was the only one who could bring the truth to light. She typed quickly, sending a secure message to a contact she hadn't reached out to in over a decade. She knows. She has the file. He's going to the press. Later that evening, Elias loaded a duffel bag with what little evidence remained from Rosalind's life. The folder, a small photo album, and an old cassette tape marked for her, "If I don't make it." Maribel stared at it, stunned. She recorded something? Elias nodded. "I never had the nerve to listen. I figured if I heard her voice again, I'd never stop chasing ghosts." Maribel picked it up gently, her fingers tracing the faded label. "Then maybe it's time we hear what she had to say." They looked at each other, knowing what they were about to do couldn't be undone. As Elias inserted the tape into an old player and pressed play, a low hiss filled the room. Then a voice, soft, determined, and unmistakably Rosalind's, emerged from the static. "If you're hearing this, I didn't make it, but that doesn't mean the truth dies with me." Maribel covered her mouth as her mother's voice filled the cabin. Elias closed his eyes. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the porch, and deep in the woods, headlights flickered through the trees. They weren't alone. The cassette played on, its static barely masking the urgency in Rosalind Emberfield's voice. "There are people, powerful people, who want this buried. Not just my findings, but me. If I disappear, Elias, promise me you'll find her. Tell her everything." Maribel sat perfectly still, her hand resting over her heart. The tape felt like a time machine, pulling her into a world she'd never been allowed to enter. Her mother's voice was strong but laced with fear, an emotion Maribel had never imagined from the woman she'd known only in fragments. "Tell her she was the reason I fought so hard," Rosalind said, "and tell her to finish what I started." Elias turned off the tape, the silence afterward louder than the message itself. He didn't speak for several seconds. Neither did Maribel. The room was heavy with unspoken truths. Guilt, grief, And something else. Resolve. She recorded that 2 days before she vanished, Elias said finally. I got it in the mail. No return address. Just the tape. Maribel looked down, voice trembling. I used to wonder what kind of woman my mother was. I thought she died sick, quiet, powerless. And now I find out she died fighting for something bigger than herself. Bigger than all of us. Her jaw tightened. I won't let them erase her again. Outside, Ruffin stood alert by the door, his ears perked. A low growl escaped his throat. Elias walked to the window and carefully moved the curtain. A black SUV sat at the edge of the driveway. No headlights, no engine hum, just there, watching. Maribel wheeled beside him, her eyes narrowing. That's them, isn't it? Elias gave a short nod. They're testing us, seeing how close we're willing to get to the fire. He moved quickly, retrieving the duffel bag and handing it to Maribel. Take this and stay in the back room. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Maribel didn't move. I'm not hiding. Elias raised his voice just slightly. I'm not asking. She reluctantly rolled down the hallway, Ruffin following close behind. The back room was small and lined with bookshelves, the walls thick enough to muffle sound. Maribel locked the door, her fingers shaking. She opened the duffel bag again, scanning the documents. She paused on one, a photo of her mother with a man she didn't recognize. The name written on the back stopped her cold. Dorian Ashbriar. The same name from a redacted report in Rosalind's file. Her heart raced. She had seen that name somewhere before, on a plaque in the town courthouse. A donor, a respected public figure. But why would he be connected to this? In the living room, Elias opened the front door slowly, stepping onto the porch. The SUV door opened in response. A man stepped out, tall in a gray coat. His face was calm, almost too calm. Mr. Thornhollow, he said with a slight smirk. You're making things difficult. Elias's eyes narrowed. You people made things difficult when you left her daughter to grow up thinking her mother died of nothing. The man smiled politely. We did what we had to, just like you will now. Elias stepped forward. She's not yours to control. Not anymore. The man's smile faded. That's where you're wrong. And inside, from the shadows of the back room, Maribel whispered to herself as she clutched the photo. I know your name now, Dorian, and I'm coming for the truth. Over the next week, their meetings in the park became quiet routine. Maribel would arrive mid-morning, a thermos of tea balanced in her lap, and find Elias Thornhollow already waiting under the same oak tree, sometimes with a book, other times just sitting in silence with Ruffin Mosspelt by his side. They didn't talk much at first. Theirs was the kind of connection that grew in the spaces between words, two people who had seen too much of the world to waste time with small talk. But every so often, a question would slip through, about life before the wheelchair, about his years in the Navy, and little by little, the curtain between them lifted. Maribel found herself thinking about Elias long after their conversations ended. There was something in his stillness that made her feel safe, not in a protective way, but in a seen way. Most people either tiptoed around her condition or treated her like a fragile porcelain figure. Elias didn't. He looked her in the eye. He didn't rush to help unless she asked. That kind of dignity was rare, and it made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, whole. But beyond the calm he radiated, she could sense something darker lingering just beneath, a grief or guilt that clung to him like an invisible weight. She never pressed, but she noticed it, in the way he sometimes paused mid-sentence, or the flicker of pain behind his eyes when she mentioned her own regrets. One morning, as golden leaves began falling from the trees, Elias surprised her with a small, leather-bound notebook. You said you were an artist, he said, handing it to her gently. Thought you might need a place for the next chapter. Maribel blinked, caught off guard by the gesture. The cover was engraved with delicate vines, and the paper inside was thick and textured, perfect for sketching. She ran her fingers over it and looked up, but Elias had already turned his gaze to the horizon. It was, without question, the kindest gift she'd received in years. And it scared her a little because kindness from someone like him carried weight, and weight meant risk. That same afternoon, back at her apartment, Maribel opened the notebook to the first page and began to draw. Not the trees or flowers she used to sketch, but Elias. His eyes. The crease in his brow when he was lost in thought. Ruffin, curled at his feet like a silent guardian. It wasn't about admiration, it was something else. A desire to understand what lived inside him. And as her pencil moved, her thoughts drifted back to something he'd said earlier that day. "I left a part of myself in the desert," he had whispered, almost too quietly to hear. She hadn't asked what he meant. But now, she wondered if maybe he wasn't just talking about war. Meanwhile, Silas grew uneasy. He watched Maribel leave each morning with growing concern. His librarian instincts whispering that something didn't feel right. Not about Elias himself. Silas had done his research and found nothing criminal, but about the timing. About the way this mysterious veteran had appeared out of nowhere, just when Maribel seemed to be finding herself again. "Be careful," he told her one night as they washed dishes. "Not everyone who seems kind stays kind." Maribel frowned but didn't argue. Instead, she retreated to her room and opened the notebook again. This time, she added a new element to the drawing. Behind Elias's figure, faint and nearly invisible, she sketched the outline of a woman. Someone she didn't recognize, or maybe someone she'd forgotten. Later that week, as Elias sat alone with Ruffin under the usual tree, a figure approached from the other side of the park, someone he hadn't seen in over a decade. Tamsin Wilder rose. Her posture was rigid, her lips thin with caution. She stopped a few feet away and crossed her arms. "Didn't think I'd find you here, Elias." He stood slowly, a shadow crossing his face. "I thought we agreed never to talk again." Tamsin's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to disappear and play the hero. She deserves to know the truth, even if it kills her." Elias didn't respond, but deep down he knew. The past was no longer buried. The next morning, Maribel noticed a shift in Elias. He still sat beneath the same oak tree, Ruffin alert at his side, but his posture was tense, shoulders hunched in a way that betrayed the weight he carried. She approached with her usual smile, but he barely nodded. "You okay?" she asked carefully. Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable, and gave a short shrug. "Didn't sleep much." Maribel didn't push. They sat together in silence, the cool breeze rustling the leaves above them. But something in the air had changed, something just beneath the surface. She could feel it, like a storm forming behind a sunny sky. He eventually broke the silence. "Have you ever remembered something too late?" he asked, his voice quiet. Maribel paused, thoughtful. "Every day," she answered, her gaze fixed ahead. "I replay the morning of the accident over and over. The choices I made, what I missed, what I thought didn't matter." Elias nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes the things we forget, they don't stay forgotten. They just wait." His voice cracked on that last word, and for the first time since they'd met, Maribel saw not the steady veteran, but the man beneath. A man whose own story was unraveling, thread by thread. Back at home, Silas was staring at an envelope he had pulled from an old box tucked beneath his bed. It was yellowed, unopened. On the front, written in careful, feminine cursive, was a name that hadn't been spoken in their house in over 15 years. Rosalind Emberfield. Silas had found the letter after their parents' death, but never showed it to Maribel. She had been too fragile then, still reeling from a recent illness and later the accident. But now things were stirring that he no longer understood. And that name, Rosalind, was back. Because that morning, while looking through some old digital archives, Silas had come across something chilling. A military personnel file from 2007. Elias Thornhollow, next of kin, Rosalind Emberfield. Classified, fiancé, deceased. He didn't want to believe it was the same woman. Couldn't. But the dates, the location, they lined up too perfectly. Silas sat on the edge of his bed, the letter trembling in his hands. If Rosalind had once been engaged to Elias, and if she had died under mysterious circumstances, What did that mean for Maribel? Why had her name appeared again now, after all these years? And why did he feel in his gut that Elias hadn't told Maribel the full truth? Meanwhile, Elias stood at his window that night, watching the rain run in rivers down the glass. Tamsin's words from the day before echoed in his ears. She deserves to know the truth, even if it kills her. But how do you tell someone that the woman who raised them wasn't who she claimed to be? That the past they clung to was an edited version of something far more complex? Something dangerous? Ruffin, sensing his unease, pressed close to his leg. Elias placed a hand on the dog's head and whispered, "I should have told her the moment I saw her face. God help me. She looks just like her." The next morning, Elias didn't show up to the park. Maribel waited nearly an hour, glancing at her watch every few minutes, her sketchbook unopened. She felt it in her chest. Not just disappointment, but fear. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Silas's words, Tamsin's appearance, and now Elias's absence. They were all pieces of something much larger. And deep down, Maribel knew. Whatever it was, it had everything to do with the woman no one ever talked about. The woman whose name had been erased from the family's history. The woman named Rosalind Emberfield. Maribel didn't sleep that night. Elias's absence from the park wasn't just unexpected. It was unsettling. Their routine had become a quiet comfort, something steady in the chaos of her world. And now, with him gone, something didn't feel right, not just emotionally, but deep in her bones, in the place where instinct whispers that something is shifting beneath the surface. The next morning, she wheeled herself to the local library where her brother, Silas Underwinter, worked. His eyes widened when he saw her, but he said nothing as she approached. "You're keeping something from me," she said firmly, "and I'm done being left in the dark." Silas closed the reading room door behind them and reached into the bottom drawer of his desk. He pulled out an old, sealed envelope, worn at the corners, the handwriting faded but unmistakably feminine. On the front, Rosalind Emberfield. "I found this after Mom and Dad passed," he said, his voice quiet. "I thought I was protecting you." Maribel's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, raw, and emotional. It was a goodbye, a warning, and at the bottom, in a line that stopped her cold, it read, "If anything happens to me, Elias Thornhollow will know why." Her stomach dropped. Elias had known her mother, known something about her death, and never said a word. She left the library in a haze, ignoring Silas's calls behind her. Her mind was spinning. How much of her life had been built on lies? Instead of going home, she took the long road out to the edge of town, to Elias's house. The gravel crunched under her wheels as she approached the modest cabin surrounded by trees. Ruffin Mosspelt stood in the yard, ears perked, tail still. Elias appeared on the porch, expression tired but not surprised. "I was going to come see you," he said quietly. Maribel didn't return his calm. "You should have come yesterday." He nodded slowly and opened the door for her to come inside. The interior of the house was warm but sparse. Bookshelves lined the walls, half-filled. A fire crackled low in the hearth. But it was the photo on the table that pulled her in like a magnet. A woman, sharp eyes, dark hair, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. Maribel wheeled closer, unable to look away. "Is this?" she began, voice trailing. Elias answered, barely above a whisper, "That's Rosalind, your mother." Maribel's world tilted. "No," she said, shaking her head. "She died when I was a baby." Elias stepped closer. "That's what they told you." The silence that followed was unbearable. Maribel felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her. "Why would they lie to me?" she asked, her voice cracking. Elias's face darkened. "Because they thought they were keeping you safe. But the truth is, Rosalind didn't just pass away. She was taken, and I failed to stop it." The weight of those words crashed over her. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair as she tried to process what she was hearing. The accident, the silence, the missing years. It all began to unravel. "Tell me everything," she demanded. Right now. But before he could answer, Ruffin growled low in his throat. Elias stiffened. He turned toward the back window. Footsteps, subtle but real. Someone was out there, just beyond the trees. Maribel's eyes widened as Elias moved quickly toward the back door, silent and alert. Ruffin followed, muscles tense. Whoever was out there wasn't just passing by. They were watching, listening, and now they knew. Elias moved with practiced caution, stepping onto the back porch while Ruffin stayed low at his side, growling just enough to signal that this wasn't a false alarm. Maribel sat frozen in the center of the room, her mind racing. It was hard to know which fear gripped her more, the truth she just heard, or whoever was out there listening. Elias's eyes scanned the woods beyond the backyard, his hand resting on the old wooden railing. The footsteps had stopped. Silence stretched across the yard like a taut wire. Whoever had been there was now gone or hiding. After a long moment, Elias stepped back inside and shut the door behind him with a firm, controlled motion. "They were listening," he said. "They'll come back." Maribel swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice brittle. Elias sat down across from her, his posture straight but visibly strained. "People connected to the ones who took your mother. It was never random. Rosalind, she knew things, dangerous things, things the wrong people didn't want exposed." Maribel stared at him, her mind attempting to fill in the blanks faster than he could speak. "You're telling me my mother was targeted?" Elias nodded once. "She worked for a private intelligence firm off the books. She found something big. She tried to get out. We were going to leave everything behind. Then she disappeared." His voice cracked at the end, and he looked away, ashamed. Maribel felt like the room was spinning. Everything she'd believed, her mother's quiet death, her father's avoidance of the topic, even Silas's protectiveness, was built on a hidden world she had never been allowed to enter. "And you? Why didn't you try to find me?" she asked, sharper than she intended. Elias's eyes returned to hers. "I did, but they kept you hidden. Your adoptive parents were good people, but they were told not to contact me. I only found out you survived years later, after the damage was done." His jaw tightened. "By then, I was no longer the man I used to be." Maribel looked down at her lap. Her hands were trembling. "So what now?" she whispered. Elias stood and walked to a small wooden chest in the corner. He opened it and pulled out a faded manila folder, sealed with a red clasp. "Now, I show you what Rosalind died for." He placed the folder in her lap. Inside were documents, photos, and a thumb drive. Names she didn't recognize. Faces, codes, all pieces of something that looked and felt much bigger than her mother's story. This is why they watched you," Elias said. "Why someone was outside my house tonight." As the realization settled into her bones, Maribel felt something she hadn't felt since before the accident. Purpose. She had been sidelined for so long, treated like a fragile victim of fate. But this made her more than that. She wasn't just the girl in the chair anymore. She was part of something buried deep, something worth chasing, even if it was dangerous. Her voice was quiet but clear. "We need to go public." Elias didn't answer at first. He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a child he failed to protect, but as the woman she was becoming. "If we do," he said slowly, "there's no going back." And from the shadows outside, behind the tree line, someone watched and smiled. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees at Liberty Grove Park, casting long golden shadows on the grass. The sounds of birdsong and distant laughter mingled with the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was peaceful, at least on the surface. Seated near the main pathway, Maribel Crowhurst gripped the arms of her wheelchair tightly. She was sketching. Her fingers, though delicate and steady, were stained with charcoal and pastel dust. A half-finished portrait of a dog lay across her lap, along with scattered art supplies around her feet. Her eyes, a soft gray blue, held both calm and caution. as if expecting the quiet moment to be taken away. Behind her, gently pushing her chair across the gravel path, was her older brother Silas Underwinter. Protective and measured, Silas had left his job at the community library early that day. He rarely let Maribel go out alone, less out of fear for her safety, and more because of how people could be. They weren't wrong. 3 young adults approached, their loud voices cutting through the serene park like broken glass. One of them, a tall boy with unruly curls and a mocking smirk, pointed at Maribel and snorted. "Careful," he said to his friends. "Looks like she's gonna run us over in that Ferrari." Laughter followed. Sharp, unkind. Maribel's shoulders stiffened, but she said nothing. Silas moved to step between them, but before he could say a word, a sudden voice broke through the tension from just behind the group. "I suggest you stop right there." The voice was deep, firm, and impossibly calm. It belonged to Elias Thornhollow. Elias wore a plain white shirt tucked into dark jeans, and his sleeves were rolled up over forearms marked by time, scars, and memory. Around his wrist was a faded band, his military ID from years ago when he'd served. A quiet force, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. And beside him stood a German shepherd, tall and alert, his fur dark as night and his eyes as piercing as his master's. His name was Ruffin, a service dog, a companion, and more. He could sense tension before it arrived, and his growl was already low in his throat. The teens turned. One of them smirked again, but more nervously this time. "Just a joke, man." Elias didn't blink. "No, it was disrespect. There's a difference." He bent down, slowly, and gathered Maribel's scattered pencils with careful hands. Then he looked into her eyes, really looked, and gently handed the supplies back to her. "You all right, ma'am?" Maribel blinked, stunned, but nodded. That was when everything shifted, because what started as a simple defense of a stranger was about to unravel a chain of events that none of them saw coming. The walk home was unusually silent. Silas pushed Maribel's wheelchair along the park's winding path, his jaw tight and his thoughts tangled. He hadn't said a word since the confrontation. Maribel, however, was still replaying the stranger's voice in her mind. Elias Thornhollow. There had been something in the way he'd looked at her, not with pity, but with understanding. The kind of look she hadn't seen in a long time, maybe ever. It wasn't just the firm way he stood up to the kids. It was the silence that came after, how even the wind seemed to hold its breath while he spoke. And that dog, Ruffin, the animal hadn't barked, hadn't lunged. He just watched, as if he already knew the kind of people he was dealing with. That night, over dinner, Maribel couldn't eat. Her fork pushed vegetables in slow circles on her plate while Silas nervously folded his napkin over and over. Their apartment was small, lined with shelves of books and drawings that Maribel refused to sell, even though money was tight. On the wall above the fireplace was a single photo of them as children, standing beside a lake with their parents, now both long gone. "He didn't even hesitate," Maribel said suddenly, breaking the silence. Silas looked up. That man, Elias, he saw what was happening and just acted. Her voice wasn't filled with admiration as much as confusion. People didn't usually do that. People watched, they passed by, they made assumptions. Elias Thornhollow didn't do any of that. Silas leaned back in his chair. "You know who he is, right?" he asked carefully. "I thought the name sounded familiar. He used to be a Navy officer, decorated, retired early. Some say it wasn't voluntary." Maribel frowned, curiosity blooming in her chest. "What happened?" Silas shrugged. "No one knows for sure. Some say he lost a unit in Afghanistan. Others say he had a breakdown. He lives out on the edge of town, keeps to himself, has that dog." The weight of those words lingered in the air. The idea of a man carrying such invisible burdens mirroring, in some ways, her own. Not physical scars, but internal ones. And suddenly, she realized that perhaps their meeting wasn't entirely by chance. The following morning, Maribel returned to the park alone. Silas had been hesitant, but she insisted. "I'm not hiding because of a few teenagers," she told him. As her wheels rolled softly over the grass, she scanned the tree line with quiet purpose. It was still early. Dew clung to the grass and the air smelled faintly of earth and something unspoken. Then, in the distance, she saw him, Elias, sitting on a bench beneath a towering oak tree, reading a worn paperback while Ruffin rested at his feet, alert even in stillness. She hesitated, gripping her armrest. What would she even say? She almost turned back, but something deeper, older, urged her forward. Maribel approached slowly, her heart pounding in a rhythm she hadn't felt since before the accident. Elias looked up, sensing her presence before she spoke. He nodded once, as if he'd been expecting her. "Good morning, Miss Crowhurst," he said calmly, setting the book down beside him. "Didn't expect to see you out here again so soon." His tone wasn't casual, carried weight, respect, and something else she couldn't place. "I wanted to thank you properly," she began. "Not just for what you did, but for how you did it." Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at the sky, then back at her. "Sometimes," he said, "we're given moments to do what others wouldn't. If we let them pass, we don't get them back." As the morning unfolded, a conversation began. Slow, layered, and full of silences that spoke louder than words. Maribel learned that Elias didn't just live on the edge of town. He chose solitude, not because he disliked people, but because war had taught him how cruel they could be and how fragile. He spoke little about his past, but what he did share painted a picture of a man haunted not by one tragedy, but by many. And in return, Maribel told him about her accident, about losing not just her legs, but a future she had built in her mind since she was a girl. But even as they spoke, neither realized just how entangled their pasts truly were. That beneath all this coincidence lay something that would soon rise to the surface. The man from the SUV didn't flinch as Elias took another step forward. The night air was heavy with tension, the kind that wraps around your chest and tightens with every breath. "You don't want this to turn into something it doesn't have to be," the man said smoothly. Elias kept his hands visible, his voice calm but steel-edged. "Neither do I, but I'm not handing her over. Not to you, not to anyone." Inside the house, Maribel pressed her ear to the wall, straining to catch every word. Her heart pounded. She recognized the tone in Elias's voice. It wasn't fear. It was a warning. Back in the hidden room, Maribel's eyes scanned the documents again, zeroing in on Dorian Ashbriar's name. She now remembered exactly where she'd seen it before, engraved in bronze on the town's new civic center, made possible by a generous endowment from Dorian Ashbriar, the man who had shaped their community from behind closed doors, who posed as a philanthropist, had once worked beside her mother, or against her, and now he was trying to erase the last trace of Rosalind's legacy. Maribel reached for her phone, but there was no signal. Of course, she needed to act, not wait. Her voice was shaking, but her mind had never been clearer. Elias, still standing on the porch, glanced toward the side of the house. Ruffin appeared briefly in the shadows, giving a single signal. Maribel was safe, for now. The man in the gray coat stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Look, Elias, we don't want her dead. We just need the files. You know what happens if this goes public. There are people with more to lose than either of us." Elias stared at him, unmoved. "You already took everything from her once. I won't let you do it again." The man's expression shifted for the first time, something between irritation and regret. "Then you're forcing our hand." Suddenly, headlights swept across the yard, Silas's car. He hadn't been able to sit still. He stepped out, clutching the letter from Rosalind in one hand. "She deserves to know," he shouted across the yard. "And if you hurt her or Elias, I'll make sure every word of this letter gets published." The man turned slowly, surprised by the interruption. "Well, now it's a party," he muttered. Elias used the distraction to signal Ruffin, who silently moved into position behind the man. "You're outnumbered," Elias said, voice rising. And if you think she's alone in this, you've already lost. Inside, Maribel had wheeled herself to the hallway, folder in her lap, heart pounding. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She opened the door and rolled forward, past the living room, past Elias, and stopped right in front of the man in gray. Her voice was steady when she spoke. You know who I am, but now I know who you are. She held up the photo of her mother standing beside Dorian Ashbriar. And soon, so will everyone else. The man looked at the picture, then back at her, the corners of his mouth twitching. You don't understand what you're stepping into. Maribel didn't blink. Maybe not, but I know what my mother died for, and I won't let that be in vain. In the dark beyond the trees, more headlights began to appear. But this time, they weren't enemies. They were allies. The air was electric. As the new vehicles rolled to a stop beyond the trees, several figures stepped out. Journalists, allies from Elias's past, and one woman in particular, Maeve Winterbourne, the investigative reporter Elias had contacted. She carried a camera, a microphone, and a look of someone who knew the weight of truth. The man in the gray coat looked around, realizing the tide had turned. You planned this, he said, more impressed than angry. Elias didn't respond. He didn't need to. Maribel, seated calmly at the center of it all, became the focus. Maeve approached her first. Are you Maribel Crowhurst? She asked. I am, Maribel said, lifting the folder. And I have a story you're going to want to hear. What followed felt like something out of a film. The driveway became a press briefing, the truth unfolding piece by piece as Maeve recorded everything. Maribel handed over the files. She spoke of Rosalind, the tape, the threats, the lies. Silas provided the letter. Elias confirmed the chain of events. Names were named, Dorian Ashbriar chief among them. As the evidence mounted, the man in gray stepped backward, disappearing into the shadows, knowing it was over. Not because a gun had been drawn, but because the truth had already begun to spread. And nothing silences a story that's ready to be heard. Later, back inside the cabin, the storm had passed. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. No longer suffocating, but sacred. Elias stood near the fireplace, looking at the only photo he had of Rosalind that wasn't hidden. He reached for it, then paused. You know, he said softly, she was always braver than I was. Maribel looked at him, her voice gentle. I think she'd say the same about you. He turned toward her, something like peace slowly returning to his expression. You did what I couldn't. You told the truth. A week later, the story broke nationally. Maeve's article was shared across major outlets. Dorian Ashbriar resigned from multiple boards and disappeared from public view. Investigations were launched. New evidence came to light. But most importantly, Rosalind's name was restored. Her grave, once tucked in a corner of a forgotten cemetery, was replaced with a new stone, one that bore her full name, her accomplishments, and a single, powerful line beneath. She never stopped fighting. At the rededication ceremony, Maribel delivered a short speech. She wore a dark green coat and a pendant that once belonged to her mother. Elias stood beside her, silent but proud. Silas was in the front row, eyes full of quiet pride. For a long time, Maribel said, I thought the only thing that defined me was what I'd lost. But I was wrong. My mother taught me, even from the shadows, that truth has a voice. And so do I. The audience stood in quiet reverence, the wind carrying her words like a promise. That night, back at the cabin, Ruffin lay by the fire, finally relaxed. Elias handed Maribel the leather-bound sketchbook he had given her weeks before. You never showed me what you've drawn, he said. She opened to the first page, an image of Rosalind standing between two shadows. In one, Elias. In the other, herself. It's not finished, Maribel said. Elias nodded. Neither are you. And for the first time in a long, long time, Maribel smiled.